This time we're going to be looking at the world of startups. So to help me with that, we've got an expert here who can give us the inside scoop on everything we need to know.
Hi, everyone.
So just to get us started, we're going to be pulling some insights from Eric Ries' book, The Lean Startup. But we really want to go beyond just the book, you know, explore kind of the wider world of startup success. So get ready to challenge some of your assumptions along the way. And yeah, I think it's going to be a pretty eye-opening journey for all of us.
Definitely, it should be fun.
Now, when we hear startup,
Mhm.
right, we often picture that classic image. Someone's working late nights in their garage, surviving on ramen noodles, just dreaming of changing the world with their brilliant tech idea. But there's got to be more to it than that, right?
Yeah, definitely. It's not really about the setting or even the industry. It's more about navigating extreme uncertainty. It's about not knowing if your product's going to resonate with customers, if your business model is even viable, or if you're even solving the right problem.
Okay, so it's not just about, like these young tech companies trying to be the next Facebook or Amazon or whatever.
Right.
Like, how would this apply to, say, like a big company, like a traditional kind of company?
Sure. Yeah. So think about like a big car manufacturer. They've been around forever, but when they decide to launch like a brand new electric self-driving car, they're in uncharted territory. There's a ton of unknowns, and that's essentially a startup scenario.
I see what you mean. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like they're launching a speedboat off the side of their giant, cruise ship
Hmm.
and venturing into these uncharted waters.
Yeah.
So, okay, so how do you steer a ship, whether it's big or small, when you don't even have a map? I mean, in the past, we always heard about like these super detailed business plans, but those just seem kind of useless now and everything's always changing.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Traditional business plans are based on predictions and forecasts, which works well in stable environments, but startups, they're not stable. Clinging to a rigid plan in that kind of environment, it can actually be bad.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's like trying to sail across the ocean using a map of a lake.
Uh,
The terrain is completely different.
yeah, exactly.
Okay, so what's the alternative? Are we just saying like throw out all the plans and just make it up as you go?
No, no, not quite. It's called the lean startup approach. It's about embracing that uncertainty.
Okay, so instead of trying to like predict the future, you're constantly learning and adapting as you go.
Exactly.
But how do you actually like do that? Like
Yeah.
in a practical sense, how does that work?
Well, it starts with a shift in mindset. So instead of focusing on building the perfect product from day one, you build what's called a minimum viable product, an MVP.
Okay, an MVP.
So it's a version of your product, but with just enough features to attract early adopters and get feedback.
So we're not talking about releasing like a half-baked or unfinished product, are we?
No, not at all. It's about being very strategic and intentional with what you build. Think of it like building a prototype,
Okay.
like a prototype of a bridge. You wouldn't just build the entire bridge without testing if it could hold any weight, right?
Right.
You'd test it on a smaller scale.
Sure.
So that's what an MVP is. It allows you to test your assumptions without investing too much time and resources.
That makes sense. So can you give us like an example of like how this actually works in the real world?
Sure. So say you have an idea for an online shoe store, right? Instead of spending months building this super complex e-commerce website, you could just start by manually taking orders through like a simple website or even an email address. And you could personally deliver the shoes to your first customers, get their feedback.
So essentially you're testing the waters before you build like the whole, full-blown platform.
Exactly.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, and there's a great example, the online shoe retailer, Zappos.
Zappos. Okay.
They did the same thing. They just wanted to test whether people would buy shoes online.
Oh,
They didn't even have their own inventory. They'd go to local shoe stores, take pictures, and post them online. If someone ordered, they'd buy the shoes from the store and ship them.
that's brilliant. Like they were basically validating their entire business model before, like investing in all the inventory and, all that stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like dipping your toes in the water before you dive headfirst into the pool.
Exactly.
So, okay, so how do you know if your MVP is working? Like, is it just looking at the sales numbers?
Well, sales are important, but they don't always tell the whole story. We have to look beyond vanity metrics like website hits or app downloads. Those can be misleading.
Okay, so what should we be looking at? What should we be focusing on?
We need to look at actionable metrics. Data points that actually reveal how customers behave, how they interact with your product, and whether they're getting the value you intended.
So it's like, you're not just looking at the numbers, but you're trying to understand the why behind them. Like being a detective almost, looking for clues to understand the customer's journey.
Yeah, exactly.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Um, so do you have like a real world example of that?
Yeah. So let's say you're building an app to help people learn a new language.
Mm.
Instead of just tracking the downloads, you want to look at how often they're using the app, how long are their study sessions, are they progressing through the lessons?
Oh, so it's not just about getting people to download the app, it's about getting them to actually use it and, find value in it.
Exactly. There was this company, they built a platform for online courses. Initially, they saw a huge spike in registration, so they were excited.
That's great.
But then they looked closer, and most people were signing up, but they weren't engaging with the courses.
Oh, so the numbers looked good, but the reality was different. So
Yeah.
what did they do?
Well, they realized it wasn't a product problem, it was a marketing problem. They were attracting the wrong kind of users.
Ah, so they were attracting people who were curious but not actually committed to, actually learning.
Exactly.
So they had to adjust their course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that brings us to a really important concept, the pivot.
Oh, a pivot. So it's not always a straight line to success.
No.
Sometimes you have to change direction
Yeah.
based on what you're learning.
That's the beauty of this approach. It's flexible.
Okay, so it's not about giving up, it's about refining.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you give us an example? Like a real-world example of a successful pivot?
Sure. So there was this company that wanted to build a platform to connect verified voters, create a space for political engagement.
Okay.
So they launched it and people were signing up, getting verified. But then something interesting happened.
What's that?
They weren't using the platform as intended.
Oh, so they had built like a technically good product, but it wasn't really solving the problem they set out to solve.
Right.
So what do they do?
So they realized they had stumbled onto something else. It wasn't about building a social network. It was about providing a way to reach these verified voters.
Oh, okay.
So they pivoted and built a platform that allowed campaigns and organizations to connect with those voters directly. And it was a huge success.
That's really interesting. So you set out to climb one mountain, and along the way you discover a hidden path that leads to like an even better view. But pivoting, I mean, that can't be easy, right? It takes a lot of courage to admit that you need to change direction, especially when you've already put so much time and energy into the original idea.
Oh, absolutely. It's not a decision you make lightly. You really need to analyze all the data and the feedback you've gotten. But sometimes holding on to a failing idea can be even more costly in the long run.
Yeah, I can see that. It's like clinging to a sinking ship when there's a lifeboat right next to you.
Exactly.
So how do you know when it's time to pivot? Like, what are some signs that maybe, you should be reevaluating your direction?
Well, one key indicator is a lack of traction.
Okay.
If you're putting in the effort, but you're not seeing the customer engagement you expected.
Yeah.
If your growth is flat or you're getting negative feedback,
Okay.
that might be a sign.
So it's not just about having a good idea. It's also about being willing to let go of that idea if it's not working.
Exactly. You got to be honest with yourself and your team. Sometimes the most successful entrepreneurs are the ones who are willing to admit they were wrong.
Right. It takes humility to do that.
Yeah.
Now, pivoting, it's not just about changing your product or your target market. Sometimes it also means adjusting your business model, right?
Absolutely. Netflix is a classic example.
Netflix.
They started as a DVD rental company,
I remember those days, yeah.
but they quickly saw that the future was in streaming.
Okay.
So they pivoted.
Yeah.
They invested heavily in streaming technology, streaming content.
And now look at them.
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing to think that one of the biggest entertainment companies in the world started by like mailing DVDs to people's homes.
It is. It really shows how important it is to adapt and anticipate the changing needs of your customers.
Right. And speaking of changing needs, that kind of brings us to another important part of the lean startup approach.
Yeah.
Understanding the different engines of growth.
Yeah, that's a big one.
So it's not just about like building a good product. It's also about figuring out how to get that product in front of the right people
Right.
and scale your business.
Absolutely.
So it's kind of like choosing the right engine for your car, depending on whether you're driving off-road or on the highway or in the city.
Exactly.
So what are some of those engines of growth?
Well, let's start with one that most people are familiar with, viral growth.
Okay.
This is the engine that powers companies like social media platforms or messaging apps. They grow by spreading from person to person, like a virus.
Makes sense.
Each new user brings in more users, creating a chain reaction.
Right, like Hotmail back in the day. Everyone wanted that free email address and they would tell all their friends.
Exactly.
But not every product can go viral, can it?
Well, no, of course not. It depends on whether the product can spread through word of mouth or social sharing.
Okay.
Like, think of products that are social, or that solve a common problem, or offer an incentive to
So
share.
you can't just like sprinkle some magic dust and make your product go viral.
I wish it were that easy.
Yeah.
But there are things you can do to improve your chances, like making it shareable,
Okay.
or creating content that encourages sharing, or using social media effectively.
So it's about creating a product that people love to talk about and share with their friends.
Right.
It's like starting a wildfire. The product is the spark, and then those social connections between people, that's the fuel.
That's a great analogy. Now let's move on to another engine, paid acquisition.
Paid acquisition. Okay.
So this is the engine for companies that use advertising or other paid marketing channels to get new customers.
So basically, you're investing money to reach your target audience, and you're trying to convince them to try your product.
Exactly.
Makes sense.
It can be a good way to scale quickly, especially if you know your target market and you have a good value proposition.
Right. You have to know who you're talking to.
But you also have to be strategic and track your return on investment.
You don't want to just throw money at it and see what happens. It's like, planting seeds. You got to make sure you're planting the right seeds in the right soil,
Exactly.
and then you have to nurture them.
Right.
But paid acquisition, I mean, that can get expensive, right?
It can if you're not careful. That's why it's so important to track your metrics and optimize your campaigns to make sure you're getting the most out of your investment.
It's like watering your plants. You don't want to drown them, but you also don't want to let them dry out.
Right. It's all about finding the right balance.
Okay, so we've got viral growth. We've got paid acquisition. What other engines are there?
Well, there's the sticky engine.
Sticky engine. What's that?
This one's all about customer retention.
Okay.
It's for companies that focus on building products that people love and keep coming back to.
Okay, so they're building a loyal following, a community even.
Exactly. Think about companies like Netflix or Spotify.
Right.
People keep coming back month after month, year after year.
Because they're constantly adding new content, improving their user experience, making their products even better.
Yeah, they've built incredibly sticky products.
It's like they're creating a gravitational pull. Their product is so good that you just keep getting pulled back in.
That's a good way to put it.
But building a sticky product, I mean, that takes a lot of effort, right?
Yeah, it does. You need to understand your customers' needs. You need to focus on quality and user experience. And you need to always be improving.
So it's not just about getting customers, it's about building a relationship with them and creating a sense of loyalty.
It's like building a friendship.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got these three engines of growth: viral, paid, and sticky. Do companies usually focus on just one, or can they use a combination of them?
Well, it's common to use a mix, especially as the company grows and changes. For example, you might start with a viral strategy to get things going.
Okay.
Then you might switch to paid acquisition to scale up faster.
Okay.
And then finally, you might focus on building a sticky product to keep those customers around.
So it's like using different gears on a bike. You shift gears depending on the terrain and how fast you want to go.
Exactly.
But choosing the right engine or combination of engines, I mean, that depends on a lot of factors, right?
Oh, absolutely. It depends on your product, your target market, your resources, and your goals. There's no one right answer.
So you have to figure out what works best for your specific situation.
Right.
Okay, so even with the right engine, even with a great product and a good growth strategy, startups still face a lot of challenges as they start to scale, right? It's not always smooth sailing.
You're right about that. As a startup grows, you run into new obstacles and complexities. Managing 10 people is very different from managing 100 people. And what worked in the early days might not work as the company grows.
Right. It's like you're going from sailing a small boat to captaining a huge ship. You need different skills, a bigger crew, more resources.
Yeah.
So how do startups manage this transition from a scrappy little startup to a larger organization? How do they avoid becoming a victim of their own success?
Yeah, it's almost like the things that make a startup successful in the beginning, that agility, the willingness to experiment, the scrappiness, those can actually become problems as it grows.
Yeah, it's kind of a paradox, isn't it?
It is. And that's why it's so important to think about scalability from the start. You can't just add it on later. It needs to be part of the company's DNA.
So it's like when you're designing a building, you need to make sure the foundation can support future expansion.
Exactly. One of the most important things you can do is to build strong systems and processes.
Okay.
Early on, it might be fine to be a little more, informal, But as you grow, that can become chaotic.
Yeah, it's like trying to manage a big city with the traffic rules of a small town. You need a more sophisticated system.
Right. You need to think about things like communication, decision-making, task management.
All that stuff.
As the team gets bigger, you need clear channels, efficient processes, and robust
To
systems.
keep everything running smoothly.
Yeah, like a well-oiled machine.
But building all those systems and processes, I mean, that takes time. And it's not always the most exciting work.
True, but it's essential. Think
Yeah.
of it as laying the groundwork for future growth.
Like building the infrastructure of a city.
Mhm.
The roads, the bridges, the power grid.
Exactly. And just like a city needs leaders to manage its growth, startups need that too.
Okay.
As a company scales, leadership becomes even more critical.
So it's not enough to just have the vision, the passion for the
Yeah.
product.
Right. You need to be able to lead, inspire, motivate, guide your team.
Through all the ups and downs.
Exactly. You need to delegate, empower your team members, create a culture that supports innovation.
So it's like you're the conductor of an orchestra, bringing all the different musicians together to create something beautiful.
I like that analogy.
But leadership, it's not just about management skills, is it?
No, it's not.
It's also about setting the tone, creating the culture of the company.
Culture's so important. It's like the glue that holds everything together.
Yeah, it's the personality of the company, the values, the way people interact.
And as you grow, you have to cultivate a culture that supports scalability and innovation.
One that encourages collaboration, open communication, experimentation.
Right.
Like tending a garden, you need to choose the right plants, nurture them, and get rid of the weeds.
Exactly. And just like a gardener has to adapt to the changing seasons, leaders have to adapt to the changing needs of their company and their team.
It's a dynamic process.
It is. And one of the best things leaders can do is to empower their team members.
Give them ownership, encourage them to take initiative.
When people feel empowered, they're more engaged, more motivated, more productive,
And they're more likely to come up with new ideas, take risks.
which is so important for any startup.
Right. It's about creating an environment where people feel like they're part of something bigger, where their contributions matter.
Absolutely. And that leads us to another key aspect of scalability, attracting and retaining talent.
Because as you grow, you need to find the best people to help you achieve your goals.
And it's not easy. Competition is fierce.
Yeah, especially in tech.
You need more than just a good salary and benefits.
Okay.
You need to create a compelling employer brand, a
Yeah.
place where people are excited to work, where they feel challenged and fulfilled.
So it's like you're building a magnet to attract the best talent. You
Exactly.
need a strong culture, a clear vision, a positive work environment,
All those things contribute to attracting the best.
and keeping them.
Right. Retaining talent is just as important as attracting it.
So how do you do that?
You need to create an environment where people feel valued, appreciated, and challenged.
Give them opportunities to grow.
Offer competitive compensation and benefits. Foster a culture of feedback and recognition.
It's like tending to a garden, making sure your plants have everything they need to
Vicious.
thrive.
Now, one of the biggest challenges for startups as they scale is maintaining their agility and ability to innovate.
Okay.
As companies grow, they often become more bureaucratic, more risk-averse, less willing to experiment.
It's like they're trading their speedboat for a giant cruise ship.
That's a great way to put it.
They're more stable, but a lot less maneuverable.
And it's a common trap. They focus so much on efficiency and optimization that they forget about the innovation that got them there in the first place.
So how do you avoid that trap?
Well, one way is to maintain a culture of experimentation. Encourage teams to try new things, to take risks, to learn from their mistakes.
Okay.
Create a safe space where failure is seen as a learning opportunity.
So it's about embracing the unknown, the possibility of failure?
Yeah, the most innovative companies are the ones that are willing to push the boundaries.
Is challenge the status quo.
Exactly. And that brings us to another important aspect of scalability, building a sustainable business model.
Right, because in the early days, it's all about growth, growth, growth
Right, they're willing to burn through cash, operate at a loss.
to gain market share.
It's like launching a rocket into space. It
Mhm.
takes a ton of fuel to break free from gravity, but eventually you need to find a way to sustain yourself.
Right, you can't just keep burning fuel forever.
Exactly. At some point, startups need to transition to a more sustainable, profitable model.
It's about finding that balance between growth and profitability.
Absolutely. It's about building a company that can stand on its own 2 feet.
A company that's built to last.
Exactly. And I think that's the ultimate goal of any startup, to build a company that makes a positive impact, that creates value, that provides opportunities.
About building something that matters.
Well said. And as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of startups, I think that's the key takeaway. Building a successful startup isn't just about the idea or the product, it's about building a great company. One that's built to last, one that's driven by a purpose, and one that's constantly evolving and adapting.
It's about embracing the journey with all its challenges and rewards, and having the courage to keep learning, keep growing, keep pushing the boundaries. Thanks for joining us, everyone. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.